Well, hi, everybody. Great to have you. How are you tonight? Great to have you on board. Happy April day. It's kind of windy and a little bit getting warm out there. I just wanted to welcome you to the Conradina chapter Native Plant Society monthly meeting. And this is April 12th. And we want to welcome you all. I am Carol Hebert. I am the current president of the Conradina chapter. And beyond, on behalf of all of our Conradina officers and board members, that we hope everyone is healthy, getting all their shots done, and the future is there. So we're looking forward to that. We are going to be having one more meeting online, and you can also be sure to check our website at conradina.fnpschapters.org, and that will be all posted, and even past newsletters are on there as well. Florida Native Plant Society promotes the preservation, conservation, and restoration of native plants and native plant communities of Florida. And as always, and meetings online or in person, I'd love to introduce our officers and board members, the behind the scenes nowadays, but they also do a lot of things. I'm, of course, Carol Hebert, the president. Joe Sarmiento is our vice president. Jane Higgins is our treasurer. Catherine Mary has stepped in to help with our secretary. And board members Suzanne Valencia, Martha Stewart, Sharon Dolan, Bo Platt, Jim Baldwin, Karen Moser, Dave Zeiss, Carl Weinberger, Linda Garassi, Leonard McCrae, Stuart Weimer, Sarah Morrison, and Cami Donaldson, the great team that we have together. All right, so tonight we have a wonderful guest speaker, Dr. Carey Minteer, and she's going to talk about invasive plants. So we're going to get to that in just a bit. And of course, mark your calendar for our next general meeting, which is on Monday, May 10th, again at 6 o'clock. Like to start at 6:01, so everybody's anticipating the show. And we have two speakers there. It's the people that own the Native Butterfly Flowers Nursery, Anna Hudson and Tim Harrison. And they are going to talk about the best plants for the butterfly garden. So that'll be great. Couple of events that we're involved with. I want you to get a reminder. Those of you that are members, I have your email address. So you did get a reminder that we're having an event for the Hog Point Cove, and that's on Melbourne Beach. That's a wonderful spot that has been reserved, and it's right on the north, I believe on the, uh, it's next to the Archie Carr Sanctuary, and some plants are being planted, and weeds are taken out, paths are made, and so it needs some help. It needs your hands. So this event is going to be this coming Thursday, the 15th of April, and it is at 8:30, and the address is 4520 South Highway A1A. So down A1A, and they do start at 8:30, and it's a wonderful thing. If you're not aware of who Archie Carr is, he was a American herpetologist. Oh, and he did study the sea turtles, and the sea turtles have become onshore, and they're starting to nest. So he's very famous for that. And Brevard County, especially Melbourne Beach area, but definitely Brevard County now holds the most nesting of loggerhead sea turtles in the world. So we want to help out with this location, and just keep lights off the beach, no littering on the beach, no flashlights, all that thing, and really respect the loggerhead sea turtles. All right, that's this Thursday morning, April 15th. The next thing we're going to participate in is on this coming Saturday, the 17th, and this is Satellite Beach Coastal Garden Fair and Earth Day celebration. It's going to be 9 to 2. We do have a booth there, so we want you to come visit us and buy native plants if you'd like. We also, it's going to be right at the DRS Community Center, and that's right there on South Patrick Drive, 1089 South Patrick Drive in Satellite Beach. So it's going to be some other vendors, and it's great. They're really, Satellite Beach is really working hard to promote native plants and to promote to be earth friendly. So it's Earth Day there. So please come visit us. We're going to have a lot of volunteers there helping us out. One last thing before we get into our speaker is we do want to remind you that we are landscaping with our Florida natives. That garden tour is coming up. Our committee is leaning a little bit that we may be actually doing it in person. We haven't quite totally decided yet, but it is October 16th, 2021. So we're hoping that it'll all be a safe place to still stay apart from people. But it's going to be our 12th annual native plant garden tour. So mainly we're asking to see if there's any people that have a home they would like to offer to be, seen by the public and see your native plants. And it doesn't have to be 100%, but we like it pretty high. We'd come look at it. But we also would need some volunteers to help. So a way to contact us is to go to our website, which is, of course, conradina.fnpschapters.org. And if you go there, it goes under the area that says contact us, and you'll find myself, Carol, and you'll also find Carl Weinbarger, and that has his phone number and his email. Mine just has my email. So we'd love to have some help with that. So on to production. We're looking forward to having Carey here with us tonight. Hi, Carey.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. Hope you're having some good times here in Florida. You're a little south of us, right?
Yep, I'm in, my lab is in Fort Pierce. I'm currently in Vero Beach.
Okay. Okay. So still a little south of Brevard County,
Yes.
but very good. A little warmer today, maybe. I don't know.
It was beautiful today.
Well, if it's okay, I'm going to do a little introduction on you and then let you take over, because it's going to be really fascinating about the non-native plants that occur. So Dr. Carey Minteer is an assistant professor at UF IFAS Indian River Research and Education Center in Fort Pierce. And Carey's a graduate of the University of Arkansas and specializes in invasive invasive ecology and the biological control of invasive plants. Carey has a particular interest in investigating the potential indirect effects of biological control and other weed management techniques and educating the public about invasive plants. Carey's currently working with multiple weed species, including Brazilian pepper and air potato and earleaf acacia. Thank you, Carey, for coming on board.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So I know that you all have plenty of Brazilian pepper tree and air potato in Brevard County, because I have spoken to a lot of you over the past couple of years about some of those issues. So Native Plant Society, we're going to flip the script tonight and talk a little bit about invasives and about some of their control. So thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm pretty excited to be here. So let's start off with the definitions. So invasive plants have to be two things. They have to be non-native. So our native plants cannot be invasive. If a native plant is problematic, it is a weed, not invasive. And so there's a little bit difference in terminology. So invasive plants have to be non-native, and you can see a lot of non-native plants in this slide here. So we've got water hyacinth, of course, which is one of our big aquatic plants. Old world climbing fern, which you might have a little bit of it up in Brevard County, but it's primarily south. This is the lovely air potato that you have plenty of in Brevard County, Melaleuca. And then here is kudzu, which gets into kind of the northernmost portions of Florida, but not really down in South Florida too much. And then the middle one doesn't occur in Florida, but it's what I did my my PhD research on, and so it's spotted knapweed. So I like to put a shout out in most of my presentations because that's where I started. The second thing that invasive plants have to do is they have to be non-native and they have to cause harm. And the harm that they cause can be a number of different things, one of which that they can cause environmental harm. So these are things like crowding out, outcompeting native vegetation, as you can see in this photo of old world climbing fern. That's on a tree island at Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. You can see these are climbing up over the tree, shading out things underneath it. Well, what this does is it then reduces forage and habitat for our native fauna. And we've actually seen full-grown deer get caught in these vines and basically die because they can't get loose. So also negative impacts on fauna that way. They can also do things like alter fire regimes, alter water flows. You can see with this vine, if a fire started to quickly go into the canopy of the trees where fire's not good, and so it can cause a lot of environmental harms. The next is it can cause economic harm. Invasive plants can threaten commercial, agricultural, recreational activities. So here's our water hyacinth again, up on the top here. These are interconnected mats that are so thick that a ship can't get through. Back in the 1940s and 50s, the St. Johns River was completely crowded with these plants. You couldn't get ships through. Any of you all who are familiar with the St. Johns notice that it's a very large river, and it was completely clogged by these plants. The one on the bottom is tropical soda apple. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but this is problematic in rangelands, so cattle ranches and things. That can greatly interfere with economic activities. And lastly, you can also cause harm to human and or animal health. And so a lot of these invasive plants can be toxic to wildlife. They can be toxic to livestock. They can cause itchy, scratchy rashes, as you can see in this slide right here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You're not expected to be able to read this, so don't worry about trying to read those tiny little names, but this is supposed to just kind of give you the overview of invasive species in Florida. So we have about a little over 4,700 different plant species in the state, and about a little less than 1,500 of them are non-native. And so not all non-native species are invasive. There are plenty of what I like to call well-behaved non-native species, but a lot of them can be problematic. And so this is a list that is created by the Florida Invasive Species Council. It used to be known as the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. And they put this list out every 2 years, categorizing kind of the worst of the worst weeds. And they categorize these as category 1 and category 2 plants. So category 1 plants are invasives that are altering native plant communities by displacing native species and changing community structures. And those are the worst of the worst. And we have about 81 species, according to the Florida Invasive Species Council, of those plant species. Category 2s are invasive plants that have increased in abundance but have not yet altered Florida plant communities. So they're there, they are expanding, but they're not yet really changing community structures. So these are kind of the ones that we want to keep an eye on. You don't want to be planting either one of these in your yard. But category 2 are the ones that aren't, it's not Brazilian pepper, right? These are ones that are like, keep an eye on these guys. These are probably going to become category 1s at some point in the future. And of those, we have about 85. So we have a little over 160 worst of the worst plant species in Florida. It's what keeps me in business. It's job security for me, but we would definitely like to keep that number lower rather than higher. Why are ecosystems in Florida so prone to invasive species? Well, for many reasons. One, mild winter. It's the mild winter, invasive species like the mild winter. A lot of human beings like to come down here for the mild winter. So you can see winter kills a lot of species. A lot of species cannot handle that freezing. And so this enables species to, many species to be able to thrive down here. We have multiple ports of entry into the state. There's a lot of movement of commodities around the area. We have a lot of interconnectivity of water bodies, which means that seeds and other propagules can spread really easily with the water. And we have plenty of disturbances. Our lovely hurricanes on top of many other human and natural disturbances in the state. Well, we know they're bad. So how do we control them? Well, there's multiple ways of being able to control these species, and we will kind of go through a little bit of each one. I will concentrate on biological control because that is my area of expertise, but I'll give you a little bit of a background on the rest of them so that you can get, you can understand a little bit about how we control these things. So the first is cultural control. So cultural control is altering the growing requirements or cultural conditions of a plant species. So you're taking away anything a plant needs in order to survive. So these things are like light, water, oxygen, carbon dioxide are things that the plant really needs to be able to survive. In order to do this, we do it with things like mulches and weed guards that take away light from a plant. So if the seeds are underground, you're going to shade them out and they're not going to be able to grow. Other ways to use cultural control are things like drawing down of lakes. And so you draw down a lake, it's obviously going to kill the aquatic plants that are occurring in that lake. I don't know if I've ever seen this done in Florida, but from where I'm from in Arkansas, this happens actually quite often. So but just another way. So you're removing something that the plant needs in order to survive. Next is mechanical control. So this is the physical disruption of a plant species. And so this can be cutting. So you see mowing here, harvesting with this very large machine that is actually harvesting aquatic plants. You can also burn things. This is also mechanical control. And these things work great. I mean, you cut things down, you pull them up, you burn them. It works great. The problem with a lot of these other methods of control is that it works great on smaller areas, but when you're talking about landscape level weeds, there's not enough people in Florida to pull all the Brazilian pepper up. And so it's scale is really the big thing here. And the last one before we get to biological control is chemical control. So this is the use of chemicals or herbicides to take out a population of invasive plants. And you can do that from helicopter or boat or backpack sprayer. A lot of these chemicals are available to you at your local home improvement store. And always read the label. It's always important to read the label on these, but these also work great on the small scale and even slightly larger scales than some of the other ones. Downsides of this are, of course, that chemicals are expensive. It boils down, they're poison, right? They are killing plants, and so you can have non-target impacts because you're killing plants other than your target weed, and so you have to you have to learn about these things before you use them and always follow the label on that. And the last is biological control. So this is the use of living things, and we call them natural enemies, in order to reduce the density of a pest. It's important to note that biological control will never eradicate a pest. And when we're talking about landscape level weeds like we are tonight, it just reduces the density to a more tolerable level. So this is a pond in Australia that is covered with floating salvinia, a water weed. This is before biological control. After the beetles were introduced into the lake, this is what it looked like. I think it was 18 months later. And so that's some pretty spectacular control. Now, it doesn't always eradicate a pest. You can't really tell in this photo too well, but there are small patches of those weeds still left in there. But I would be happy with this level of control. And this was just using natural enemies.
Just a quick question, Carey.
Sure.
Now, what happens to those biological, like the insects and so forth, after they've eaten all that? What do they just die on their own, or what happens to those?
They do. It's an excellent question, Carol. So I like to say that at first the insects control the weed, and then the weed controls the insects, because these insects, and we'll talk a little bit about this later in the presentation, are host specific. So they only feed and reproduce on one species or very few species. As you get less food, it supports fewer insects. And so you get less weeds, insects start dying because they don't have enough food to support that population. And so the number of weeds, you're going to get fewer weeds, then you're going to follow with fewer insects. And then there's going to be less pressure on the weeds. And so the weeds are, of course, going to come up a little bit, providing more food, and then the insects are going to follow suit. So it's kind of like an equilibrium that will work for hopefully ever. So that's kind of the theory.
Yeah, that must have taken a lot of research too to determine which insect with each weed.
It does, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the coming slides. So yeah, I won't leave you hanging. I'll tell you the whole story. So, and then the combination of any of these control methods together is called integrated pest management. I like to call it the Wonder Twins. And sometimes it's the Wonder Twins, sometimes it's the Wonder Triplets. It's anything combining those control methods to be able to get the best impact out of your control methods. And so, as I said before, my area of expertise is biological control. And so I'm not really going to talk about the other methods of control for the invasive plants that I will talk about the rest of the talk. However, on each of the weed species pages, I will put one of these QR codes. And so the QR code will take you to the website, the EDIS website, which is the University of Florida webpage, where we put out information. It's like electronic delivery information system. Ooh, don't quote me on that for the acronym, but so if you actually turn on your camera on your smartphone and hold it up so that that QR code is in the view of the camera, it will actually come up as the link. You can click on the link and it'll take you directly to the page. So this will actually take you to EDIS, where you can search any number of things. So EDIS is the information website for all things related to Florida. So it's got invasive weeds, it's got thing about hurricanes, it's got all sorts of things in there. And so it's a great source for information. All of these are written by extension agents or faculty members at the university. So very knowledgeable people, experts in their field. And so you ever have a question about something, that's a great place to go to. But so I'll put those QR codes out there for all the other weeds that we'll discuss, in case you're interested in other methods of control other than biological. Now let's return back to biological control. And why does this work, Carey? You're just introducing bugs. There's bugs out there all the time, right? Yes, there are bugs out there all the time. See, what these invasive plants, as I told you before, they're non-native, so they come from some other place. So Brazilian pepper tree comes from Brazil. And so here in the native range, plants have co-evolved natural enemies. So this is our dapper yet problematic herbivore here. Now, Brazilian pepper tree has over 100 different species that feeds on it inside Brazil. And what this does is the plants in Brazilian pepper tree in Brazil has to defend itself against these natural enemies, right? You all probably garden, you probably are very familiar with this, right? So plants defend themselves in all sorts of ways: chemicals, thorns, tough leaves, hairs. But that comes at an energetic cost. And so they're not a very good competitor because all of this energy is going towards protecting themselves against these herbivores. Well, in the invasive range, these plants are most often introduced without these co-evolved natural enemies. So what this does is this frees up all of these resources that were being used for defense over here, that no longer has to defend itself over here. And so it now can grow much faster, it can produce more fruit, it can produce more seeds, because the plants that it is competing against are over here in this category. And so it's really unfair. And so what classical biological control does is it goes back to the native range of these plants, find these co-evolved natural enemies, and after plenty of research and regulation, reunite these species in the invaded range to reinstill some natural level of control. Now, we will talk a little bit about the process of biological control, so the reason I can say these things. And so a lot of the positives with biological control is that it's safe. I mean, because it's host specific, these things will only feed and reproduce on one or very few plants. The insects make more insects on their own and they spread into new areas. So these are self-perpetuating. Once they're out there and established, we no longer have to interfere. They do their own thing. And so this means is a very high return on investment, because once they're established, we can move on to other weeds. The insects do the jobs for us. These are also environmentally friendly because oftentimes we can reduce pesticide use. It's also, because it's so specific, there's virtually no non-target impacts. And so, so it can be very environmentally friendly. As with any of the control methods, there are negatives, and the negatives with biological control is that it's a high upfront cost. And we will talk about the process of biological control and why it's such a high upfront cost. Because you don't want me going to Brazil, picking up some bugs, coming back here and releasing them. That is not what we do. There's lots of research that goes behind this, and so it costs a lot of money in order to be able to do that. It's slow, both in figuring out what insects are going to be safe to use, as well as once I release the insects. You all are probably very familiar with the air potato biological control program. That biological control program was a total silver bullet. Like, took off super fast. It really damages the plants and really caused a decline in the plants in a very short amount of time, just a couple of years. That is not what usually happens. Usually it takes between 5 and 10 years before we're actually noticing that something's out there taking care of these plants. And like I said before, it will not eradicate a pest. It's just going to reduce it to a more tolerable level. All right, the process of biological control. So for an exploration, so this is going back, this is going to the native range of the insects to find these plants. What we do is we look for species that are feeding on our target weed. It's also important that we are looking for species that are feeding on our target weed and not feeding on other plants in the area. We only want things that are going to feed on our target. We don't want things that are feeding on everything. We often work very closely with our overseas collaborators to determine identification of the insects, background information, initial testing, because it's way easier to do in the native range. And then once we kind of figure out, yeah, these insect species are going to be pretty good candidates to bring in and do the rest of this testing. We think they're going to be pretty good to use for biocontrol. Then we bring them into what we call quarantine or containment laboratories. So this is my laboratory in Fort Pierce. This is a specialized lab designed to keep things in it. So everything that goes in and out of this facility is regulated, from the people, the things we can take in and out, the wastewater that comes out, the air that comes out. And so it's very, very, very regulated so that we can ensure that once we put insects inside that lab, that's where they will remain until we take them out on purpose. Okay, so in order to be able to test to make sure that these insects are going to be safe, we do testing on plant species. And so what we do is we have to draw up a test plant list. And so you all are the Native Plant Society, so you are going to completely understand all of this plant stuff, unlike a lot of my audiences. So I like to say that plants have almost like a chemical fingerprint, right? So plants that are closely related to each other are going to have very similar fingerprints. They're going to have similar chemicals in them. They're going to have similar physical characteristics. They're going to have smell and taste very similar to the insects because they're closely related. It's like me and my sister are a lot alike. Are much more alike than me and Carol are. So what we do is we design this test plant list. And so the very first kind of ring of our test plant list are all the other plant species in the same genus. Okay, so these are the most closely related plants to our target plant species. And we are going to test all of them. And we are going to test all of them, not just in Florida, but we're going to test all of this plant species in the same genus that occur in North America and the Caribbean, because insects don't pay attention to geographical boundaries. And so if there's a plant in the same genus in Mexico, we need to test it because there's potential the insect could get there. And so these are the plants that are going to be the most likely to be fed upon by our potential biological control agent. So we test all of them just to make sure. And then you move out a little further. So these are other genera in the same tribe. And so these are more like the cousins, right? And so we test most or all of them. You move out a little bit further. So we're other tribes in the same plant family. And we're going to test most of them as well. Then you get out to plants of economic or aesthetic value. So these are plants that aren't necessarily super closely related, but maybe have something in common with the target plant, like they produce a similar chemical, or maybe they're just super important economically. So things like citrus, right? So where the risk or the potential for our insect feeding on something out here is super low. But if it did feed on something out there, the damage could be super high. So this is like we're covering our bases at that point. Doubtful that we're going to get any feeding out there. If you don't get any feeding on this ring, things on this ring are pretty safe. But we do test them just to be safe. We're very, very thorough when it comes to plant testing. Also, while in quarantine, a lot of times these insects that we bring in, we don't know what they are before we actually do all these studies. And so we have to be able to do a bunch of these studies to figure out, basically what makes these insects tick. So we do things like basic biology studies. So how long does it take them to develop? How many eggs are laid by each female? Where and when are the eggs laid? Identification. We always have to get these insects identified. There are an estimated 5 million species of insects on this planet, and we know about 1 million of them. So there are plenty of insects that we don't know yet because they're everywhere. And so getting identification is key. Once we kind of know all of the identification, the basic biology stuff behind the insect, We then move on to impact studies, because even with all of these studies, and I can tell you that this process is extremely safe, there's still a small level of risk involved. Anytime you're introducing something new into an environment, there's risk involved. So we take out most of the risk, but in order to be able to take that minuscule amount of risk that's left, we have to know that there's going to be a benefit. And so we have to do impact studies, because we're not going to release an insect that doesn't have a negative impact on the plant, because what's the point, right? And so in this picture, we've got, this is water hyacinth, this is water hyacinth that didn't have any insects, and this water hyacinth did have insects. And so we do studies looking at that to make sure we will have an impact. We have plenty of biological control successes in Florida. We have plenty in worldwide, but when it comes to the US, we have a ton in Florida because we have a lot of weeds, right? And we also have a lot of biocontrol scientists working on this. So we're very lucky with that. This is a brochure, and I'm happy to send it to you, Carol, if you all are interested in this. If we were at a meeting, I would have brought some for the back table. But alas, we are here. But I have the electronic version if you all are interested in this. I'm going to start talking about some of these biological control successes that we've had in Florida. First is alligator weed. So there's that QR code if you all are interested in learning about other methods of control, background, a little bit more background on the weed or the insects. This is alligator weed. So it is an aquatic or semi-aquatic plant. Can occur actually on the water or on the shore. It's native to South America, and it was introduced into Florida in the early 1900s. In 1963, about 97,000 acres of the U.S. was infested with this water weed. And then the alligator weed flea beetle was brought in. It was established in the U.S. in 1965. You can see this super cute yellow beetle here, the not so cute larvae, but very damaging. These guys eat a lot. So the larvae are the most damaging. Both the adults and the larvae feed on the leaves. They chew on the epidermis of the stalks, and they can kill the plants. So remember the 97,000 acres, can't remember off the top of my head right now. Back in 1965, in 1981, less than 1,000 acres were infested in the US. And so this is a huge difference. Notice the years, 1965 to 1981. So that's a long period of time. But I think less than 1,000 acres is, yeah, something to celebrate. So this insect species is capable of reducing plant populations in about 3 months in smaller areas. So extremely effective, at least in coastal regions. So we don't have a whole lot of alligator weed in Florida, and these insects are very, very widespread. And it's really good in coastal regions because we have those mild winters, right? So this insect doesn't survive winter temperatures well. And so in order to do this, augmentative releases or multiple releases every year are done to reestablish these insects in the more northern inland areas. The Army Corps of Engineers does this for some of the more northern states, where they actually collect beetles from Florida, put them in a box, and ship them up to the Northeast. So, or up to the more northern states. So not very good outside of Florida, or at least coastal regions of the southeastern U.S., but a very, very effective agent. Next is tropical soda apple. We talked about that a little earlier with the cattle ranches. So this plant is also native to South America. It was first reported in Florida in 1988. You can tell it's a solanaceous plant, so you can see all these nice thorns here on the stem. They're also on the tops of the leaves, or they're underneath the leaves. This is not a plant that you want to mess with. Like pretty much anywhere you grab this plant, it's going to draw blood. It's very, very, very pokey. And so cattle don't like to eat it, and it is a huge problem in cattle ranches. And one of the reasons is Nice little succulent fruit right here. Cattle love to eat those fruit, and they do. And then the cattle eat the fruit, they defecate the seeds out, and the seeds germinate in this nice big pile of fertilizer. And so it spreads it everywhere in cattle ranches. And so it's a very, very bad weed in cattle ranches. This weed then spread into most of the southeastern U.S. and infested about 400,000 hectares across 11 states. So extremely widespread problematic weed. So here's the cattle ranchers. This can also be a reservoir of plant pathogens for solanaceous crops, things like tomatoes and potatoes. So it is definitely no good. And it used to cost Florida $6.5 to $16 million in control cost annually. So economic damage for sure. And then enter Gratiana boliviana. So this little tortoise beetle here, just super cute. They're actually translucent on the underside, so you can actually kind of see what's going on. They're just phenomenal little beetles. But these guys were first released in 2003. And they can actually reduce the density of tropical soda apple by 90%. Extremely effective biocontrol agents. And not only can they reduce the density of the plant, they can also reduce fruit production by up to 94%, which is important if the cows are then taking the fruit everywhere. So very, very damaging. But just like the alligator weed flea beetle, these have issues getting established in areas with colder winters. And so I have a postdoc working with me right now who's actually working on some methods in order to be able to get these beetles more established or be able to survive the winter better in more northern areas. Because, like I said, this plant spread across 11 states. And so people outside of Florida would like some of this control as well. Next is air potato. I know you all are very familiar with that up in Brevard County. This is native to tropical Asia and Africa. It was introduced in 1905 as a potential horticultural crop or potential food crop, maybe. There's some debate on that. This plant can displace natives. It can disrupt ecosystem functions. It can grow up to 8 inches in a single day, so you can literally watch it grow. It's called air potato because of these aerial bulbils that look like potatoes. So they grow in between the axils of the leaves, and it's a vine, so they're up in the air. They do flower here, but we only have one sex of the plant, and so we don't get any seeds. Thank goodness. Could you even imagine if we had seeds and bulbils? So this is, a super damaging weed that was present in every single county in Florida. We'll enter the air potato leaf beetle, Lilioceras cheni. This pretty red beetle, I'd like to call this charismatic microfauna after my friend Ellen Lake clued me in on that name. They're just adorable. They're these super cute little beetles. They squeak, and so they kind of talk to you as well. And people just love these. They're great for taking out to talk to people about. The beetles, the adult beetles feed on the leaves. The immature, so the larvae, aren't quite as charismatic. They look a little slimy, but super voracious feeders. And so the larvae actually are more damaging than the adults are, but they do quite a bit of damage on air potatoes. So these were first released in 2012. They were found by a couple scientists at the Invasive Plant Research Lab, the USDA lab down at Fort Lauderdale. Both larvae and adults feed on the leaves, and they skeletonize the leaves, as you can kind of see here. So it makes them look like lace. And so anytime I talk to somebody, I'm like, what do your leaves look like? And they say they look like lace. I'm like, you have the beetles, you're fine. So they do a great job of reducing this plant. So this is some data out of Min Rayamaji's lab. And in the top left-hand corner, you have an area back in June of 2012 before the beetles were released. Down in the bottom left-hand corner is the exact same area in August of 2013, so a little over a year later. And much less air potato there. And on the right is 2 years after release, and you can hardly see any air potato in there at all. So it can reduce vine cover as well as bulbal density, extremely damaging, and we couldn't be happier with this biocontrol agent. Now, fingers crossed on the next plant that I'm going to talk about. We just started releasing agents for this one just a couple years ago. And so keep your fingers crossed that I will be telling you about the success of this one in several years. But it's Brazilian pepper tree, and foreshadowing with all the talk about Brazilian pepper tree before. So Brazilian pepper tree is native to subtropical regions of South America. It's here outlined in the blue. It's a perennial tree that occurs in coastal and open areas. It is a member of the Anacardiaceae, and since you are my plant people, you know that means it's the plant family of all the itchy, scratchy things like poison ivy, poison oak, mango if you're allergic. And so it can cause rashes in people. It was actually introduced into Florida on purpose back in the late 1800s. And now all of these counties in the green are where this plant occurs. It invades disturbed and natural sites. It can displace native vegetation. And it was actually introduced into Florida twice, once on the West Coast and once on the East Coast. And the physician that actually brought Brazilian pepper tree into Punta Gorda is on record as saying it's so beautiful it ought to be in every garden in Florida. Yeah. So we didn't always make good choices back in the day. I'm hoping that we have made better choices at this point, and then we've definitely learned from our mistakes, because I don't think this is what Dr. Stone had in mind. So yes. Well, what makes Brazilian pepper tree so aggressive? Well, I like to call it the honey badger of the plant world. It doesn't care. It's tolerant to shade and fire and drought and salinity. It literally will almost grow anywhere. Some literature show that it's allelopathic to neighboring plants, which means it secretes chemicals into the environment that inhibits the germination and the growth of other plant species. As I said, it was introduced into Florida twice, on the East Coast and the West Coast. Well, the biotypes of plants that were introduced don't occur close to each other in Brazil. Here, they're much closer together, and those two have hybridized and produced a much more a faster growing plant, produces more berries, and so you got this massive fruit production and plant growth on the hybrids. And of course, those lovely, lovely, lovely berries are loved by birds, and they get spread over extremely long distances. The good news is that we have 2 approved biological control agents of Brazilian pepper tree. The Pseudophilothrip ichnii, or the Brazilian pepper tree thrips, and Calophyllata forceps, the yellow Brazilian pepper tree leaf galler. Both of these species feed on these tender growing tips on the very ends of the branches of Brazilian pepper tree. First, I'll talk about Calophyllata. Of course, it's the leaf galler. They're, of course, from Brazil because that's where the plant is from. So these are our adults. Our immatures are pit gallers inside the leaves. So basically, the females lay eggs here on the margins of the leaves. You can see the very small eggs right there. After about 7 to 10 days, those eggs hatch. The crawlers then crawl to the usually upper surface of the leaf, where they initiate galling. So basically, they insert their mouth parts into the plant and they start feeding, and that's where they stay as a nymph for 30 to 40 days. And so this is a 5th instar, the very last stage of the nymph. And then they emerge as an adult, and the cycle starts over again. The adults feed on the plant, but they don't cause a whole lot of damage. This is the stage that really causes the damage to the plant, because they sit there and they feed for that entire 30 to 40 days, and they act as a nutrient sink on the plant. Of course, we did host range testing of this species, and this species laid eggs on 7 different plant species in the Anacardiaceae, so in that same plant family. Good news is that either on those 7 species, the eggs either dried and did not hatch, or if they did hatch, the nymphs crawled to the surface of the leaf and died or did not complete development. So this is Shinus mole here. This is the most closely related plant to Brazilian pepper tree in the U.S., and it actually doesn't occur in Florida. It occurs in California. And you can see these galls are very small, very shriveled. So this is after 30 days. This is Brazilian pepper tree after 30 days. These are actually 2 different species of the Califia, but you can see these nice plump galls right here. This is what they look like when they emerge. You see that, what we call it a pit gall, looks like a little punch bowl. And this is Pistachio vera, pistachio, and this is what it looked like after 16 days. So these nymphs are dead, they're dried, and they're definitely not developing. And so there was no damage to these plants other than cosmetic damage. So very host specific. These species are damaging on Brazilian pepper tree. It includes yellowing of the leaves, deformed leaves, and in severe infestations actually cause leaf drop. And as you all know, the leaves are the powerhouses of the cell. And so if you're dropping leaves, you're definitely not growing that well. So the verdict on the leaf galler is that it is host specific. It will only feed and reproduce on Brazilian pepper tree. It is damaging, causing that leaf drop, and it's approved for release. However, we did lose this colony shortly after getting the release permits. Oftentimes when you have insect species inside the lab for years and years, the colony isn't very healthy, and so we lost the colony, and so we need to go back down to Brazil to get more. Well, you all know I would be here in person if we weren't dealing with COVID. So I can't come and meet you at the library. I also can't go down to Brazil to get these insects. And so right now we have some travel restrictions in place. We're hoping that we'll be able to get down and get these insects in the summer months, which is November to January for Brazil. And keep your fingers crossed that we're able to do that this coming November. Once we bring them back, we have to establish a colony. That's going to take 2 to 3 months. We have to get all of these cleared by the Florida Department of Agriculture. And so best case scenario, we'll be releasing these mid-2022. And so keep your fingers crossed on that. We're really hoping we can get down to Brazil and get these insects. The better news is with our Brazilian pepper tree thrips, because we still have that colony and we have been making releases of those. So these are the thrips. This is an adult thrips. It has unlike our air potato leaf beetle, this has a face only a mother could love. So not a very cute insect, but it's very damaging. And so I'm sure that you will love them as well. The eggs are shown here, and they're laid on those newly growing stems. Once those eggs hatch, there's 2 larval feeding stages here. So there's yellow and light orange. And they feed on the newly growing stems. The adults feed on the newly growing stems and slightly older stems, but still kind of that tender growth. And then we have 3 stages of 3 pupal stages, and these usually occur in the soil underneath the trees. Like I said, we have released these across the state. Releases began in June of 2019, and we've released about 735,000 across the state. So here is a map, and the blue counties, we've released over 10 releases. So Brevard County has a good amount of releases so far. The green counties are between 1 and 10 releases. This is definitely not just my lab. So this release program is labs down at the USDA ARS lab in Fort Lauderdale, my lab in Fort Pierce, and then the Florida Department of Agriculture Division of Plant Industry lab in Gainesville. So we're working together to try to get as many of these out on the landscape as possible. So hopefully here, after a year or so, this map will be very filled in. But we're definitely working towards that. And current damage. So these are out there. We've seen some damage. So here is kind of early damage. You can see the larvae here. These things are very hard to find in the field because they're so very small. But this is what the early damage looks like. So this is a newly expanding leaf tip. You kind of tell that these things are shriveling. At some point they'll fall off. This is, it looks almost burnt. So I tell people to look for when they're looking for the thrips damage going down the stem. So it looks like it almost got burnt by a lighter, but that's thrips damage. A little later, this is what it'll look like. You can see those leaves have kind of fallen off. You can see that burnt going down the stem some more. And even later, when you have more damage, this is a much larger stem than here. And so, so we are seeing damage in the field. We definitely haven't seen a reduction of Brazilian pepper yet because, as I told you before, it takes a very long time to see it. So be patient with us. The thrips are out there; they're doing well, and we're really starting to see the damage. We're even better than seeing on the adult plants. We've actually started to see the insects moving off adult plants onto Brazilian pepper tree seedlings. So actually keeping those from becoming larger trees. And so we're very hopeful that here in 5 or 10 years, I can come back and tell you how spectacular of a success this is. But I definitely do not do this alone. And so we talked about a lot of different insects, a lot of different plants. I have to thank my lab, which are these smiley, happy people in the upper right-hand corner, collaborators from overseas. As I told you, that's very important that we have these collaborators. It would be impossible to do this work without them. Of course, the funding agencies and the myriad of people that that we collaborate with these things on. Every time I show this slide, I'm a little afraid I've forgotten somebody, and I'm sure I have, which is one of the reasons why it just says you have extension agents, because there's so many that I would definitely forget somebody, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But thank you for your attention, and here is my email address. If you have a question or wanted to chat about something, we're also on social media. And so Twitter, that's my Twitter handle, and then on Facebook as well. We're not currently releasing these to the public just yet. We're currently working on large swaths of land, usually public, but we will be offering the Brazilian pepper agents to the general public sometime very soon, probably this summer. And those social media pages are going to be the best place to get that information quickly, because that's, of course, where the first place we're going to put it out.
Great, great. Wow. That was so full of information. We probably could even use those sites up again. So if you get a chance, you can put them up there. But I know others, I just had some compliments that it was a lot of good information, and we're rooting for those thrips. Is that what they're called? That insect that,
Yep.
Okay, we're rooting
Precisely right.
to do their best and get that Brazilian pepper out of there. I liked your brochures too. And how could we get those?
I can send you the electronic copy. If you want paper copies, I can send them to you as well. Because you're meeting not next month, but maybe the month after that.
Yeah, we're hoping that we would be meeting in what is that? June at Ernanexon Park, and we'd just like to have them in our possession, because then we do go to these events and have them ready to show people. Probably more so even, with the coming year when things open up a little more and we get to go to different events to promote native plants and to show people about the invasive exotics, or how to identify them and who to turn to, which would be you guys.
Yeah, perfect. I'll be happy to send you out a packet.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I know there was one. I have two more questions. You had 82, I think was the correct number, of category 1 in Florida. And so that's a huge amount. And that's for the whole state, all counties?
That's for the whole state, yep. But that's a lot of species.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Because I know some probably range up into Georgia or not. But
Mhm.
if we're just talking about Florida, wow, that really struck me. Now, do you break it down by county or anything? It's mostly just the whole state?
Yeah, so it's just the whole state. So anything that is, going to be considered, an invasive plant that is changing, native plant communities, it's going to go on that list. And so we don't really have one that's listed for sections of the state. You can go on the Florida Plant Atlas page. I think it's what I'm going to get the university wrong. And so I don't know if it's University of South Florida or FSU, but it's a phenomenal place to go. And you can look up a plant species and they'll tell you which counties it's been found in.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
EdMaps, also another great one. I showed some EdMaps maps. So edmaps.org, and that's crowdsourced data. And so other great place to be able to see where those plants are. You can also download the I've Got One app, which is goes directly to the EdMaps servers. So if you find an invasive plant, you can take a picture. It automatically uploads the GPS coordinates, and you can help crowdsource those data. And so
What's
that's a
I've
EdMaps. So EdMaps is the web based version where they have the maps, and I've got one. It's the I've Got One app.
Now, that's interesting because I think that also identifies not just plants, it almost everything that's around it. Is that correct?
Yep, they do all invasive. So lizards and snakes and plants and insects and yeah.
I went on a bird trip just last weekend, and the guy took a picture, and he's like, "Oh, I've got one," and I'm like thinking he's joking, but that was also the same name. And he goes, "No,
Yep.
it's a great website because it identifies the plant, it identified the bird behind it." And I mean, I was like, "What?" But it's funny how it's called. I've got one. That's good. 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 Um, Now we had one other quick question because somebody had, I think they've logged off already, but the chemical control, um, how does it work with the water? I was a little lost on the wet areas.
So there are specific herbicides that can be used over water. So not all herbicides can be used over water. In fact, a lot of them you cannot. So like I said, always follow the label directions. And those pictures were spray crews, people that are certified to be able to use restricted use pesticides. And so your the availability of chemicals for the John Q homeowner is a little less, thank goodness, because they're, we don't want everybody to have, access to all of these. But
So even the technological people that do that, when it hits the water, it gets organic in a little bit, or how does it
it
dissolve
it
itself?
it depends on which system. But if they're labeled for water, the EPA has approved it to be used over water, which means it's not going to impact the fish or amphibians or people.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
the regulations surrounding herbicides are very strict, especially ones used over water.
Interesting. Well, I think it's been well enjoyed. We've had a lot of people who just said, "Yay, this was good learning experience and whatnot." So we really appreciate that. It gets us educated in a lot of different ways. So that's so great. Thank you so much, Carrie. I really
Okay.
appreciate it. Um, so everybody, I just want you to hang on and come back next month in May, and we'll hear Anna and Tim talk about native butterflies. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Plant native.